For many who ascend into the Corvette Hall of Fame, their Corvette stories begin with the first time they saw a 1963 split-window Corvette. Or maybe their stories began when a neighbor was kind enough to let them sit in theirs. John Amgwert's Corvette story started in the most unlikely of ways with his grandfather's 1930 Ford Model A.
My grandfather bought the first 1930 Model A Ford at O'Shea Rogers Ford dealership in the city of Lincoln, Nebraska on January 2nd. It happened to be my father's birthday, and he was maybe 13 years old. And that was the car that he learned to drive on. He started running out of parts. He couldn't keep it running, and in 1958 he sold it. Found out through a letter from Grandma. Grandpa sold the Model A that everybody called the Hoopy, and my dad went nuts. He was so upset. He couldn't believe that his father sold that Model A without letting him know it. So we went up to Council Bluffs, Iowa. Dad said, is there any possibility we could buy it back from you? They wouldn't sell. They had about 6 kids, and they just loved the old car, although it didn't run, and they didn't want to sell it.
John's love for preserving history was evident even back then. Disappointed that he could not save the family history with the Ford, he turned his energies to another car and its history.
Here is spirit and sweep and speed. And here is comfort, deep and luxurious. Your invitation to driving fun.
And if I can't have my grandpa's old 1930 Model A Ford, I'm going to get the oldest Corvette I can find, an old Corvette, not knowing then that years later I would be a part owner of 53 Corvette number 3. And I went up and bought it that night, not knowing a thing about an old Corvette. But it did have a 6-cylinder in it. It was a Power Glide. It was white, red interior. So I gave Beardmore Chevrolet a check for $100. Got on my '69 Hugger Orange Camaro and drove home. And I guess I gotta figure out where I'm gonna get the rest of the money. Called the bank the next morning, and they said, yeah, no problem, but you're gonna need a cosigner. So I've got to get my father a cosigner. Well, when you're 22 years old, trying to get your father for a '54 Corvette, I'm gonna cosign for a loan for what? But he did, and of course, he realized after he found out what it was and told his friends that my son had just bought a '54 Corvette.
John's desire to learn all he could about those early Corvettes and preserve them led him to join a club where other owners gathered to trade information on maintenance and repairs.
I joined that just to see if I could learn about it, and so I borrowed a trailer, hauled it all the way into a Classic Corvette Club event, and I learned more in one weekend looking at 53, 54, and 55 Corvettes than I could have learned my whole life in Lincoln. And I was hooked.
The organization of that club was that one person ran it, and the publication that came out, the membership publication, was done by that person.
And a number of the directors wanted to expand the club to include models up through '62, and this would have been in 1973. So by 1974, the decision was made that we were going to splinter off.
They didn't like how that person was running it, and they didn't think that he was running it in a fair way.
Unhappy with how the club was running, John got together with Dick Campbell, Joe Chess, Tom Essig, Sam Folds, Jay Kellogg, and Gary Mortimer to start their own organization called the National Corvette Restorers Society.
And because I had a little printing background, they were looking for somebody to print a newsletter. I didn't have a journalism background, although I did have a radio background. I guess they sort of figured, well, if he's got a printing background, that's good enough. We'll have him do the newsletter, and I stepped up for that. Volume 1, number 1 was published in the summer of 1974, and we decided as a group that there was not going to be any advertising in the Corvette Restorer magazine. It was going to strictly be an automotive journal focusing on the car.
John would be the editor-in-chief for the Corvette Restorer magazine for 25 years, where his skill as a researcher, writer, and historian became a resource to others interested in Corvette's heritage. His work has helped countless others return their cars to how they were when they were first built, each one becoming a running, driving, and gleaming example of Corvette history.
The Restorer magazine was so superior, and he was the sole editor of that. He wrote the articles in that. He did all of that on his own without assistance.
He was the editor. He was the thing that kept this organization running. Most of our membership belonged solely to receive the two magazines. And John was the creator and the owner of that. You can't give John enough credit, I think, for getting the organization running in the first place and keeping it running for the first half of its life.
And I am damn proud of what I did putting that magazine together, and I pick up once in a while and go back and look at something that was published 25 or 30 years ago, and I read it and I think, damn, we were good.
John was the one that wrote the whole ball game and started the whole thing, and we try and continue that to the day. He deserves all of the recognition that will be afforded to him.
Because of all the articles and research he's done over the years on the C1s, nobody comes even close to generating as much knowledge about those old C1s as John. He's just done so much more than the rest of us.
John put his personal efforts and resources into NCRS for a long, long time. The guy who wrote All Corvettes Are Red pointed to the museum here and said that if it wasn't for the museum, the C5 wouldn't have been built. John helped develop NCRS to the point where some of us could devote our time to the museum. You can't overstate how much he has affected the hobby.
As John looks back on his life and how the NCRS has impacted so many aspects of the Corvette world, he's both humbled and thrilled. His passion and commitment to seeking out the truth about key cars in Corvette history continues to this day, and his work's impact will continue for as long as the name Corvette is spoken.
I'm being honest with you, I have no idea why I would be considered for a Hall of Fame. I have no idea at all. But yet when I get around these people and they talk about, way back when and the things that I did and the things that they remember and the magazines that they got that a lot of them still have, I start to get the idea that I must have been more of a spark plug and a ramrod than I thought I was, and I've been humbled. I wonder how proud my dad and my mom would be if they knew that, Dad, that 54 Corvette that you co-signed the loan on, it actually worked into something pretty neat, I think.
For his role in keeping history alive in the form of restored Corvettes all over the world, we proudly welcome John Amqwert into the Corvette Hall of Fame.